All right, what's up, y'all? I don't know what's going on with my internet here. Something. I was waiting for a smooth minute before it came on and said I was live. So hopefully we're good. How y'all doing tonight? All right, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get this whole situation going because it was doing something weird. All right, what is up, y'all? It's your girl Jice, and we finna talk about it tonight. So, first of all, welcome to Changing the Narrative Media. So again, we're just gonna keep pushing that, but we're out here changing the narrative, y'all. My girl Shay J jumped on a little earlier and was, just introducing herself. And so we're gonna do a few things together. And she's got some stuff going on, and I got some stuff going on. So it's just gonna be live, and we're trying to bring a few other things to the table as well in terms of our narrative and our story. So I'm excited about it. Peace, sis. How are you? All right, y'all. So, okay. So first of all, I need to give my caveat to this before I really just jump in, because I got some thoughts, some things to say. What's up? My girl Nails and Glitter is in the house. Thank you, sis. So I got some stuff to say. Let me just tell you that. I have now, I've caught bits and pieces. I'm not gonna lie. I've not listened to everything in its entirety. And y'all know how I feel about name dropping, but I just want to talk about it for a second because it has really bothered me, and it's actually bothered me for a minute. And then today I just was like, okay, let's talk about it, because at this point, I've heard these different versions about what's going on over there in Ghana, and I feel like we're it's another set of infighting that just doesn't even make sense to be infighting about. So I want to talk about that. But first, I'm going to ask you to make sure that you like and subscribe. And then also, I want to ask for you to share. So can you share this out? Let people know that we're live and invite people to come on in. I want to talk about this Ghana thing. And so I'm going to be super clear about where I stand. First of all, where I stand. Okay, I'm not committed to living in the U.S. That's me. Now, I'm not saying I'm giving up my citizenship to the U.S., but I'm not committed to living in the U.S. And I want to talk a lot specifically around what Antonio Moore talked about, because first of all, I really, most of the time, I'm really feeling what Antonio Moore is talking about. I really am feeling that. But this time, I just feel like he was off. So this is not a issue with the person, but it is an issue with his take on what's happening over there in Ghana, and a lot of kind of what's the right word? How you would put out the information. It was selective. It was really, really selective. And for somebody who I know brings a lot of receipts, and for somebody who I know does a lot of research, the biggest thing was it was kind of disappointing at how selective it was. And so, I talked about this on Tuesday because, again, leaders are fallible. And so it is what it is. Everybody has an agenda. So he's promoting out his agenda, and that's what he's doing. But I really just feel at this particular moment, it was really off the mark. So I'm not even going to get into what Roland Martin was talking about. I'm not going to get into what Boyce Watkins was talking about. I'm not about to get into what none of them was talking about. I'm really just about to break down, in particular, the last video that came out from Lord have mercy, from Antonio Moore. I was gonna say, I'm not getting into what Tariq Nasheed was talking about, but I'm gonna really just try and break down this video from Antonio Moore and what he talked about with regards to returning to Africa, and not return to Africa, specifically returning to Ghana. So let me start with that. I think he made a good point. Actually, let me start with this. If you have not seen the video that he made, I would recommend that you go and watch it. But now, hopefully, or if you have seen it, I would recommend that you then go back and listen to it again with some context and some clarity around some of those things. Because, again, he usually is coming with the receipts, and this time it was just so off base. I was just not feeling it. So Um, so the first thing is that I do agree with is we need to stop looking at Africa like it's a one place, right? It is a continent. It has 54 countries that are in it. And so when you talk about Africa, and I do feel like we just kind of make it this ambiguous thing, we talk about what's African, like there's a lot of things that's African. It depends on what tribe, it depends on what country, it depends on what culture. Like the cultures are different, the languages are different, the tribes are different, et cetera, et cetera. And we can make a lot of cases for that. The accents are different. I mean, I come from California. You start talking to somebody from the South, or you start talking to somebody from New York or Baltimore or Chicago, like we all have different ways that we even speak inside of one country. And so then imagine when you're talking about the 54 different countries and then you're like lumping everyone together and just saying Africa. And it really does a disservice to the culture. That's not what I mean to say. It does a disservice to the people of that continent because it makes them like they're a monolith and they're not, right? And so the same way that we don't like being lumped in as people of color or minority because it really doesn't do us any justice as who we are and where our lineage comes from and our culture and our norms and our heritage and all of that. It's the exact same thing when we just go over there and just say Africa like it's one thing, because you'll know very much so that people who are from Ethiopia or people who are from Ghana is on two separate sides of the continent. They don't behave the same. They don't eat the same foods. They don't they don't speak the same language. I mean, it's a whole different whatever, right? So I'm wholeheartedly agreeing with that. But one of the first things that he jumped off with talking about is that we were sold and not stolen. And that's just a false narrative. Now, it's partially true, but a partial truth is not the truth. And so there's a combination of being sold and stolen, right? And so it's a really complicated narrative. And I really hate when people try to put it in one or the other. There were people who were stolen and then they were sold. And there were definitely African people who were on all sides of that. So there were African people being stolen and there were African people being sold. And he made mention of the fact that everybody is not from Ghana. So like this idea of returning to Ghana as though everyone's lineage, starts from Ghana. I don't believe, and I haven't seen anywhere in any of the literature or anything that's being promoted out there that the intent is for people to believe that they actually have their own lineage come from Ghana. Ghana was a point, the Gold Coast or whatever was a point in which the slave trade was actually getting out into the Atlantic. So as people were being stolen from the interior and then brought all the way through to the coast, that was one of the primary points in which people were being shipped out from the coast out. And so essentially, the branding around it is really like bringing people back into that one point. And the reality of being Black in America is that you just really don't know all the time where your lineage comes from. I have 3 ADOS, grandparents, and out of those 3, I can trace back the lineage of 1 8 generations back, 6 generations of Black folks and 2 generations of the white slave owners, right? And so it's like, that's 1 out of 3. I mean, where do we come from? Who knows, right? And so we're doing a lot of the ancestry.com and but at the end of the day, we just don't know. And so I think that it's really like some kind of way to assert that we were sold and not stolen. Although I will say in that aspect that the Ashanti people were very integral in that. But then let's also then break down the idea that they were wealthy. And the reality is that they were colonized. And so if you actually dig into more of the history, and I do not profess to be a historian, but if you dig in more into the history of like that area and that space and that whatever, like, it's ridiculous. They went through multiple wars. They had, the slave castles were not built by the African people. They were built by the Dutch, and they were built by the Portuguese, and they were built by the French. And at some point, as through a process of these wars and a takeover, they were then taken over by the people of that region. But ultimately they were a British colony up until 60-ish years ago. So the idea that like this country that's not that wealthy, which is, he's admitting multiple times that the country is being developed. So, for a place that is not that wealthy to then assert that they made, all this money off of slavery, it's just kind of an interesting take. Like, if they were a rich country, would they still be developing in the sense that they are right now? And so I would assert that that they really didn't make major profits in the way that America did, in the way that Europe did, in the way that Spain did, and some of these other places that really did actually make profit off of the slave labor once they got there. So you make the sale is done once. Now they have the tool. The tool was the person. The person is who built the perpetual wealth. So once they shut the slave trade down, that revenue source is no longer there. Whereas those who, then have the slaves, that's who's continuing to build wealth off of off of slavery. So it was just a kind of an interesting take, and it's interesting to try and assert in a certain sense that that narrative, which is that we are responsible for our own, enslavement, and it's not to even recognize the fact that Europeans had been coming into Africa even before that the slave trade was going the way that it did across the transatlantic. And then in addition to that, it's like we also need to recognize that the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade were unlike, slavery anywhere in all of known history. And so I think that has been a fairly wide known fact, or well-known fact, widely circulated and well-known fact at this point, that the idea of how we were treated as slaves in America and in the Caribbean and places like that is just not how slavery was done in most senses throughout, the time period before that. So again, it should be, and if it's not, let's make it a well-known and a well-circulated fact that there are many African nations that stood up to the slave trade. There were battles that were being fought. And again, that does come to a place where we have this like nostalgic idea, not nostalgic, where we have like this romanticized, there we go. We can't be nostalgic about that. Where we have a romanticized idea about how we used to be as, as African people, right? And so then again, we're creating that monolith of like one people when it wasn't one people. It was people stolen from many nations and many tribes and, all of this, right? And so it's a much more convoluted situation than to just say we were stolen or to just say we were sold. And I don't think that we should dumb down those several hundreds of years of history into just a black and white situation, because it just wasn't that way. And again, I don't profess to be, a historian by any means, but if you dig even just a little bit, I mean, just scratching the surface would be able to tell you that. So I already was like kind of feeling weary about this video when he started off by talking about how we're trying to go back to a place that we were sold and not that we were stolen. And I'm like, that's already kind of sketchy. That's a real sketchy conversation to have right there. But okay. So then he goes on to talk about how all the celebrities are headed over there and they're making this big thing. And then basically he's like, well, first of all, it ain't even working because they don't get, that exposure or whatever. They're not getting into American media. They're only getting into, these small Ghanaian, media outlets or whatever. Right. And so then once again, I'm like, for somebody who's supposed to be on the side of Black media, like those platforms are building and growing, and they need to be able to build and grow without even having like any criticism. I don't even know why we would be attacking them. But on the other side of that, like it doesn't give enough credit to social media exposure. And so the assertion that it's not getting any real play because it's not being shown on CNN or Fox or, some of the major news outlets, I think doesn't give exposure to certain things like the social media. And so, I didn't go and look up everybody, but because he was talking about Ludacris, I just happened to jump on Ludacris Instagram page just to kind of see like how much exposure was it getting. And, some of Luda's Instagram posts had more than 500,000 people who, had exposure to the post or had an interaction with the post. And so, knowing that people scroll through stuff, they look at it, they don't even like it or acknowledge it or whatever, I would say if it's got 600, 700,000 people who have liked it, it's probably at least had 1 million people touch it, right? So, and that was just Ludacris. Like, we hadn't gotten into Boris Cujo and Akon and who else is over there? Cardi B and Beyonce and Jay-Z. Like, millions of people have been exposed to the idea of heading over there. So we need to also like just come up with, with the idea that the media or whatever outlets is not the only way to gauge how the exposure is, and kind of an archaic situation, especially for somebody who's sitting on YouTube, which is kind of like defeating the purpose, right? I'm gonna need you to stay on topic. I don't know what you're talking about. Advocate for my other half. My other half of what? I don't know if you're talking about like my significant other, which I don't have one. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, so anyway, I'm gonna move on because I don't know what that means. So I got all types of notes, so y'all gonna see me looking down because I was breaking this whole thing down for a second. So anyway, because I'm gonna come back to that whole like idea around media, because then he goes on to use some of these Ghanaian media outlets that he kind of just criticized and then use them to make his point, right? And it's like when people who are Christians use the Bible as their reference point for Christianity, it's like, which side are you on? You can't criticize certain media outlets and then use those media outlets to make your point. And so, yeah. So anyway, I feel like we have to really boost Black media everywhere. Like, we need to be able to tell our stories. I'm not half Asian, so I would like for you to at least get your facts straight. I am Black. I have an Asian grandfather. My grandfather was Japanese. I don't know what I'm supposed to be advocating for because my mother is the youngest of 11 children. All of her siblings are Black, and she was raised with a Black mother, and she was raised in the Bay Area of California. She doesn't know anything about her Japanese culture other than what she's looked up on the internet. We're Black. All right, moving on. All right, so here's the other issue that I had is that ADOS is about reparations. That is what Antonio Moore initially started off really pushing. The fact that ADOS stands for American Descendants of Slavery, slavery being an institution, and the fact that we needed to create a specific title that encompassed us as a group in order for us to make a legal claim for reparations. Okay, so ADOS as a movement is supposed to be a movement to identify which of us as Black people are entitled to reparations from the United States through a form of lineage, through our legacy, right? So at the end of the day, I really have an issue with this constant push on any and everything that's not ADOS. There are Black people everywhere, and I am very clear that they are not about Pan-Africanism or whatever the case is. And like, that's kind of okay because they have their agenda. Their agenda is reparations for people who are American descendants of slavery. But fighting for reparations for people who are American descendants of slavery does not include or should not include attacking all other Black people. First of all, the slave trade was transatlantic. So there are people who are all across the world who were involved in the slave trade and who have suffered very similar types of a lineage that we have suffered in America. Not saying the same, I'm saying similar. And so as a part of that, we also need to know that people left America. So people were actually descendants of American slavery and then went to other countries. They went to Mexico. They went to Canada. They went back to England. They went to England. They went to a lot of places. You can read about different revolts that actually moved themselves over into Mexico. You can read about people who escaped and made it over to England. There are stories about it where they have told their entire tale once they made it over into England, once they've made it over into some of these other borders. And so the idea that American descendants of slavery is only exclusive to people in America means that we're not really like following up on how people moved during that time, if they were able to escape, if they were able to break free. Once they were able to, sometimes in some cases, to buy their freedom, somebody else could have bought their freedom. Somebody could have granted them their freedom. I mean, there's a bunch of different avenues and ways in which people got out of this country who are American descendants of slavery, or who were at that point American descendants of slavery, and now might be 2 or 3 generations in another country, right? But we're still talking about lineage. So lineage is still lineage, is still lineage, is still lineage. And you can tie families and people from those other places right back here to American descendants of slavery. So I am not okay with the idea that we would be continuously trying to attack all other Black people in the name of reparations for Americans. And also just recognizing that there is a huge portion of the 54 countries in Africa who were colonized, who were exploited, and who were raped of resources and are still under those same conditions. So at the end of the day, the enemy, and this is why I be talking about low-hanging fruit, the enemy is not other Black people selling a message of empowerment, whether you believe it's empowerment or not. It's about the fact that ADOS is supposed to be created to identify who is entitled to a legal claim for reparations against the United States. After that, we're all Black. After that, we're all Black. And we've all suffered from colonization, and we've all suffered from brutality, and we've all suffered from oppression, and we've all suffered from violent white racists. So if we're going to do that, we need to not make ADOS about attacking other Black people, not about attacking Africans, not about attacking people in Europe or any of that. It does come down to lineage, and we will never be able to erase the lineage. Matter of fact, we could come from someone who was traded and someone who was doing the trading. So what does that mean for us as Black people? We could come from someone who was a Black trader and someone who was Black that was traded, because that's how mixed up and crazy things are 500 years down the line. So yes, it's about lineage, but that's just going to get so convoluted. So when we talk about being here, when we talk about being here, we have to just recognize what it is supposed to be for, what ADOS is supposed to be for. So to Luther, he says, stop we talk if you were not all of us. I don't know what that means, because I've already stated I'm ADOS. I know that definitively. All right, so now moving on. So if the other part about that is this assertion of this idea that going somewhere then takes away from the legal claim, and it doesn't, right? So I started off by saying I am definitely looking at out of country places for me to live. Now, again, there's where you live and there's where you have citizenship. Those are 2 different things. They could be one and the same. They don't have to be one and the same. And so you have people who, are able to do whatever. Okay, listen, y'all need to get something together about what it means to be Black. I can almost guarantee you that if you are Black in America, you are not 100% African. So get a fucking grip. I really don't know how to tell you. Yes, my grandfather is Japanese. You didn't even have to raise his comments because it doesn't even make a difference. My grandfather's Japanese. I have 3 Black grandparents. I have 3 Black grandparents. I don't know what else to tell you. I have 3 Black grandparents. My grandmother, my father's father, my father's mother. So my mother's father is Japanese. We know nothing about Japanese culture. Japanese people don't accept Black people. So I don't run around talking about being Japanese. Some of y'all is like, this is why we don't get nowhere, because some of us can't stay focused on what the facts are. So anyway, now anybody else who wants to jump in the comments and talk about something stupid like what I am made up of, what my cultural background is. My cultural background is fucking Black. I grew up in East Oakland. I know nothing but Black folks. It's who I'm around. It's who all my aunties are. All my uncles are. Matter of fact, my grandfather died 2 years before I was born. I don't dismiss the Japanese at all, ever. Believe me. My middle name is Michiko. How about that? My name is Jice Michiko Johnson. My middle name is Japanese. I never dismiss that. But I don't even know what we're talking about right now. We're talking about ADOS. So let's keep moving on. I'm not even about to pay you no more attention. If you don't have anything constructive, like, we can have a constructive dialogue all day. But at the end of the day, and this is something that I really stress, is that I don't think that we get where we are headed as a group, as a community. And this is one of the reasons why I do like Antonio more, is because he is really focused in and dialed in on where we are headed. And some of y'all can't even stay focused because y'all so concerned about ADOS. 3/4 of me is ADOS. So if there was reparations, bitch, I'm entitled to it. Believe that. So like, what else are we even talking about? What else are we even talking about? And because you can't stay focused on the main thing, you stay caught up in stupid drama instead of being able to talk about what we need to do in order for us to keep moving the conversation forward about reparations and about everything else. So it just gets to be a little bit like asinine sometimes, the way that y'all think, right? And I'm saying y'all as in those of you who cannot seem to understand how we need to keep the main thing, the main thing, the main thing. So anyway, now we finna move on because I'm talking about the main thing. We're gonna keep talking about the main thing. All right, so if I move out of the country, right? My claim is still owed to me no matter where I live, because again, according to ADOS, it is about lineage. My lineage does not change because my location changes. My lineage does not change because I move. I live in Colorado. I've been in Colorado now for 8 years. I'm from California. Me living in Colorado would never change the fact that I'm from California, right? So if I'm born as an American descendant of slavery, I can move anywhere in the whole wide world and I would still be an American descendant of slavery. So the assertion that moving to Ghana then does something to the ADOS movement is not accurate, because the ADOS movement is based on lineage. And your lineage doesn't change based off of where you live. So I was just really bothered by that idea that if people were interested in moving out of the country, or if people were interested in moving to anywhere, Ghana, Senegal, I'm not even looking at an African country. Let me just start with that. I'm looking at a country in South America or the Caribbean. But my point is that if people were looking at leaving the country, that does not detract from the ADOS claim, and especially doesn't necessarily mean that they're giving up their citizenship, because Ghana is pushing a dual citizenship, or they're pushing for the right to abode. And he talked about that, and I'm gonna come back to that because I think that was an important piece. Alexis, what's funny about that is that some ADOS people do really think that they're purebred. And what's even funnier is Antonio Moore is not that dumb. He even asserted in his video that Black people in America are mixed up with all type of everything. You mixed up with Indian, white, everything else. So it's just crazy to me. Like, just because I know what I'm mixed with, and I only know what I'm mixed with on one part of, on one half of me, it's interesting the way that people think about that. It's funny, but it's not even like a good funny. It's like a sad funny. Like, you be laughing, but you really be crying on the inside, because our people were so mentally damaged that we need something to attach to that is not even reality. Like the reality is that Black people in the American slavery system were raped over and over and over again by white people, by Indians, by Native Americans. Lord, I couldn't think of what I was trying to say. By a whole lot of folks. We've been at the bottom of the totem pole in America since we stepped foot here. So this just, whatever. So anyway, all right. So then he talks about an assertion of what our ancestors wanted. So he talks about Ludacris wearing this shirt that basically like asserts what our ancestors wanted or would have wanted or whatever the case might be. And I think that we all do this. I'm guilty of it myself. So let me just throw that out there. I am guilty of it myself. I'm guilty of it. I'm saying it. I'm guilty of it. Is we romanticize a lot of things. We romanticize what we think our ancestors want. We romanticize our leaders. We romanticize our heroes. We romanticize places. We romanticize lifestyles. When you have not experienced it, that means that you leave it up to your imagination and your perception of something, and it opens up the door for a romanticization of whatever, right? And so to assert on either side of that conversation, whether it is what Ludacris's shirt said, or whether it is what Antonio Moore said, to assert that we know what it is that our ancestors wanted, I think is a little bit of a ridiculous claim. But what I will say is that there is always, since the inception of the transatlantic slave, and I'm talking about the transatlantic slave specifically because slavery has always existed. It just didn't exist in this type of a form. I'm not even going to say that it wasn't brutal. There are definitely cases and instances of slavery being brutal and all of that, right? But it did not exist in this particular type of form. So now, with all of that being said, I think it's important for us to recognize that the fight for our freedom, the fight to get free, has always really been there. And then to assert what our ancestors wanted has probably changed and shifted as time went on and passed on, right? So the initial slaves brought over probably did want to go back to Africa. They probably did want to go back to their country, to their home. Over the generations, and as families got separated and languages got broken down and traditions were lost, and at some point, Africa, whatever country that you came from, if you even knew, right? Because recognize that people did not necessarily even know what their names were. People's names have been changed multiple times. You could have been one name. You could have been sold you as another name, right? You could have lost your, who your family was. You might not even know exactly how old you are. And so if you read certain slave stories, they will tell you, I think I'm about XYZ, years old. So at some point, I'm sure what our ancestors wanted would have shifted based off of their knowledge of self and their knowledge of where they came from and their knowledge of what options were even available. At some point, some folks just wanted to live. I mean, it is a wide variety of what our ancestors wanted and fought for. And so I think I try never to go in and assert what I believe that our ancestors wanted. I think that probably ranged. Some people just wanted to live, right? I mean, you had people who were scared to even attempt freedom inside the country, much less how they would leave the country. And then you had some people who were bold about it and they ran, they fought, they, created, revolts and all of this, right? So there's a wide variety of tolerances for pain, of tolerances for risk, of tolerances for fear. And so you can't just lump everybody and say this is what our ancestors wanted. So I don't, on both sides of that, I really didn't like that type of a statement. And I think what happens is those large broad statements is what ends up creating that romanticized idea, right? Is that here's what our ancestors wanted, like all few million of them. I don't know. So I do think that it is important, though, again, to remember that a lot of American slaves, they left, they went to Canada, they went to Mexico, they went to the Caribbean, they went to England, and some of them actually did go back to Africa. So it's just interesting. All right. So then the next thing he talked about is this financial crisis in Ghana. And this is probably the part where he for real lost me, because this was just a gross misrepresentation of the situation. So basically what he was asserting is that Ghana was in this huge financial crisis, and that it is, it's an emerging economy, it's not stable, and that ADOS is not able to take the risk in moving over there or building anything over there, and that Ghana essentially should have had like the infrastructure set up when they started calling in and pulling in for tourism. So first of all, before the year of return of 2019, Ghana has actually launched multiple campaigns that was addressed out to the diaspora, not just to ADOS, to the diaspora. So they have been trying to kind of pull people back into Ghana, pull people into the economy, and then also recognize that Ghana itself is a newly independent country. And so there is definitely a level there's a strong level of instability. And so even if you read from their political standpoint of how they removed power from the British, all the different types of parties, they've had a lot of ups and downs from a political standpoint. So they are not fully politically stable, and they are also, as a country that has pulled away from British colonization, they are very young. So there's that piece, and so they are definitely emerging. They're an emerging economy. They are not stable, and they are a young country, so to speak. And so I think it's, that those things are important to recognize, but to assert that this financial crisis is due to their instability is a stretch. And so first of all, I actually went through almost every article that he posted, almost every article. I did not go through every single one, but I went through most of them. And I have saved the other two that I have not gone through yet so that I can break them down as well and just kind of get a better understanding of some of these pieces. But okay, so now what actually happened in that $9 billion, which sounds like this huge number, and we have to put that in context. It's not that big, but it's just an interesting like overall scenario, right? So it's an emerging economy, and basically what was happening was they were doing a crackdown on their financial industry, which is important because, again, it's an emerging economy, which means company, like before they have all their policies really laid out, before they have outlined what this is going to look like, how much regulation and all of that, you're going to have people who are going to come in who are going to try and get in on the bottom, and they're going to start building, right? So you jump in and you get in on the bottom, and you start building, and you have these financial institutions that are popping up, and people are investing their money in them. But this is not a heavily regulated industry yet inside of that country. And so they started doing a crackdown. And when they did a crackdown, it scared investors. Now that is not specific to that country. That happens everywhere, including in the US. If you are a person who invests in the stock market, you know that any sort of bad news or anything that could be perceived as not being stable or unsure can cause dips or crashes in the market, right? So you can have a stock, and if that stock is thinking about something or has a negative projection or got into a scandal, right? Their leadership could have gotten to a scandal, and it could cause their stock to drop, right? So they don't even have to necessarily be in they don't necessarily have to be in a place where something has actually happened to the company, but because the person that is leading the company got into some craziness, their stock prices could drop. So what actually happened was, as they were cracking down on the financial industry and they're starting to close down certain financial institutions, they are not renewing licenses in some of these places, people started panicking. They want to pull out all their money. Well, when you start investing inside of financial institutions invest in other places. Not all of them are liquid, which means if I invested in a building, let's say, that's an illiquid asset, I have to sell the building before I can give you your money back. So what was happening was, basically, because of the scare, people wanted to start getting out their money, and they weren't able to get out their money fast enough. Like, these companies couldn't offload their assets fast enough to accommodate how quickly people were coming in. I mean, people were requesting their money back. And so then the case that was used was the worst case ever. Oh my God. Like, they were talking about this couple who put all their savings in there, and they had a couple, they had 12,000 CDs. I think that's how you pronounce their currency. And 12,000 CDs, I think it's CDs. I think that's how you pronounce it. 12,000 CDs equates to like $2,000 US. So this couple have been saving for a couple of years to have $2,000. Now, if you don't have $2,000 and you lose it, I'm not gonna lie, that could hurt. I mean, like, if you have really saved and stacked to just get that $2,000, that could hurt. It could hurt anybody. I've lost thousands of dollars. I've also made thousands of dollars. So it's like, money comes and goes. But if you're a person who is not great with investing, or you're new to it, or you just don't have a lot of it to invest, and you work really hard and you lose a couple $1,000s, like, that could really hurt. But essentially, they're talking about 70,000 people over a total of what ended up being in US dollars, about I think it was like 1.9 billion, something like that. And then again, it's not to say that this money is lost. These companies are still in the process of trying to liquidate assets. So they are still trying to get people their money. Now, I'm sure some people are still going to have lost. The markets are definitely dropped and all of that. But to assert that this is all due to like some sort of unstable and emerging economy was just a gross misrepresentation. I mean, we all remember 2008, 2009, and we're a very stable first world economy. And so in 2008, 2009, you have people committing suicide because of crashes. Now, our government then comes in and bails out the banks, but a lot of people, individual people, were part of the collateral for poor policy making. So to assert that this country went through something similar, and then to say that this happened to them because they're an emerging economy and because they're not stable. So then what's the US's excuse? Because this just happened to us as well. And so we have an excuse for this. We have an excuse for, what was that, 12-ish years ago, for our economy doing the same thing. It's all about policy. It's about creating policy. So then once again, let me give credit where credit is due. I appreciate that Antonio Moore spends a lot of time focusing in on policy. That is really important, because policy is what drives the economy. If you have good policy, that drives a strong economy. When you have shitty policy, that leaves the door open for people to come in, try and scam. All of that scamming is gonna fold over to the top, and it's gonna topple over. And the people at the bottom are the ones who always get hurt the most. So I appreciate the focus on policy, but like, don't try and take this financial crisis and spin it like it was something that was just about how unstable or how not, how this economy is still an emerging economy. Because from all other sectors, it is emerging, but it is still a strongly emerging, and it has a really good outlook by a lot of different outlooks. So it's not just like Ghana is not saying that Ghana is doing really well. Like, you have World Banks and other financial experts from other countries that are looking at Ghana and saying that Ghana is doing well. So Ghana's not just tooting its own horn. There are other people saying that Ghana's economy is doing well, especially for the age of the country, and especially for the fact that it's emerging. So I think that was just like this really gross representation of how that financial crisis, really took place and what it actually meant in terms of the stability of the country and all of that. And then this idea that like ADOS can't take any risk, which also just isn't true. Like, all ADOS can't take risk, but nobody can take risk. There's not a single socioeconomic group where everybody can just do anything, right? And so there are poor Asians, there are poor Hispanics, there are poor white people, and poor might look different based off the socioeconomic group. But to assert that ADOS could not or should not be going over to Africa is a little bit ridiculous. And so it was very selective in that. And I feel like that was really to just kind of drive home his point. And I don't feel like he has to, like, it was just a reach, and he doesn't have to reach, because there's already so many good points about ADOS that you don't have to reach like that. So I hope he kind of walks that back in. I just really feel like there's making this fuss about something that's not needed. It's like it's talking about the celebrities, and then it's making it seem like too many of us are considering this. And how many people are really considering moving to Ghana out of the 34 million Black folk, Black ADOS Black people? How many of us are really considering moving to Ghana? And what does that look like? And so then he talks about like the fact that Ghana reported a 10 times jump inside their tourism office, and then kind of came back and was like, but they're not ready. Yeah, I would assert that they weren't ready. Like, I don't, that was just interesting. So then he kind of jumps into this idea of the fact that that they only admitted like 120 something people into citizenship. So now, and then he made that comparison to the US. So bad comparison. If you were to try and get your US citizenship, now not to say it can't take longer, but on average, it takes about a year to get your citizenship here in the US. So if you got your green card and then you came over here and you applied for citizenship and you studied and you took the test and you took the pledge, you're looking at about 6 months to a year if you were really, really diligent about getting your citizenship. In Ghana, it takes like 5 years. So to have this idea that this year they had their largest, ceremony or whatever of new citizenship is not that far-fetched. Like, how many years ago were people starting to move over or starting to move back or move to Ghana and go after that citizenship? So it's important to acknowledge that he is talking about the fact that what they are offering is abodement versus citizenship, but they're actually offering your choice. So you can go over there and apply for citizenship, but it's going to take you a couple of years to get citizenship. So now when you go over there and you're trying to get citizenship, you need abodement to be able to really function. And so what abodement does is it allows for somebody to go into another country in which they are not a citizen, and allows them to build business. It allows them to buy land. It allows them to participate inside of that system, essentially. And so you would want to go there first, participate in the system, be able to get a job or build a business on your way to citizenship. And so that, essentially that's what our green card does, right? Our green card gives people the right to come in here and work and build businesses, and, our visas and green cards and stuff give people the right to come into this country and build. And so, again, like the fact that they did, and then it was like they did 40 something people from America. So out of the 120 people who became citizens of Ghana, because remember, Ghana's campaign is not just to ADOS. Ghana's campaign is to the diaspora. So a third of their new citizens were American. I don't think that's a bad number. Now, we can assert that it's a low number, but if it takes 5 years for you to become a citizen there, and it takes 1 year for you to become a citizen here, I don't think that you can structure that the same way. And then also, again, when we think about the fact that that's an emerging economy and we are an already established economy, like we're not really comparing the same thing. So I just think that that it is, that's an interesting thing. Now, I actually almost disagree with you. Well, let me not say I disagree with you. So Alexis says that Ghana needs to try to ensure that the prices are not differentiated between ADOS and natives. So I highly doubt that there is an actual price for ADOS. There's probably a price for citizens or non-citizens, or for residents or non-residents, something around that. Like, they're not going to say if you are Black from America, it's one price, but if you're Black from England, it's another price. Matter of fact, they're probably not even going to say if you're Black. It's probably going to be if you are a resident or you're not a resident, or you are a citizen or you're not a citizen. And that's not actually unusual at all. Even a little bit, actually. That happens. I was looking for this book that I thought I had up here, but I took it somewhere else. Just here. So where I live, just as an example, where I live, if you go to the rec center, there's two different prices. You can go to the rec center as a citizen of this city, or as a resident of this city, or as a non-resident of the city. You can get in either way, but there's a resident price and a non-resident price. So the fact that people who are visiting are going somewhere and paying a different price than people who live there is absolutely not unheard of. Now, we can think it's unfair, but I think that shit's unfair anywhere I go. Like, I'll be like, oh, damn, because I don't live here, I got to pay a different price. Okay. But let's not make it seem like they're doing something that is out of the ordinary when that's a really typical practice, even at a local level. Like literally at the rec center, almost everywhere that I've been, I've lived in 2 different cities here since I've been in Colorado, and both of their rec centers operate the same way. If I go and I live in that city, it's one price. If I don't live in that city, it's another price. And so you see that as well with member prices versus non-member prices. So, right, I do know it, right? So it's like, but I'm just saying, I don't think that that is a wild practice. And so we could look at like the margins, like, yeah, they could be charging crazy margins, but I would assert that Black people should be able to go and get in the museum in DC for free. But we got to pay to get in there. So he's like, why do we have to pay to get into a museum that we were sold from? Why do we have to get to pay into a museum that is a part of our heritage and our legacy? Here in the US, we got to pay to get in there. Right. And so I think that is just interesting, because then it's like this attack on the country itself, and all of that was just like really ridiculous. I mean, first of all, you don't have to take one of those tour packages. So the tour packages could be ridiculous. I didn't go and look at it. He made a blanket assertion by just kind of adding up some prices and saying that this is overpriced, and it very well could be. I don't think that's a government scam. That could be a opportunity that the tourists are seeing. And if you're not going to do your homework, people get taken advantage of every day who don't do their homework. I don't know how to respond to that. Okay, so anyway, so then he starts talking about like malaria. Okay, there are viruses everywhere. Malaria is one there. The Zika virus was over here. I mean, there's viruses everywhere you go. Then he talked about a really isolated event about a woman from Detroit who went over there and was killed. People are killed everywhere you go. Violence happens everywhere you go. You could go from one country to another and they don't like you and they kill you. You can go from one neighborhood to another and they don't like you and they kill you. I mean, again, I want to say that I like this brother, so this is not a him, but this was just such a far stretch to now start trying to attack the country, which is a newly emerging country inside of Africa that broke away from colonial British. Like, I just don't see how we make this a part of our ADOS movement, because I don't see how this affects what is happening over here in America, even if they are trying to attract American tourism over there. Americans go everywhere. So at this point, if you want to hop on Instagram and you want to look up Black travel, hashtag Black travel, hashtag Black travel matters, hashtag whatever, like you can go and look that up and you'll see Black people traveling to all over Europe, all over Asia, all over the Middle East. So are we expecting something different from them? Are we not, why are we holding countries in Africa to a higher standard than we are to all the rest of the world? If anybody should get a break, it should be those countries. We are the fastest to give everybody else a pass on how they market to us, how they take our dollars, how, any of that. But when it comes to our own people, then we're the toughest on us. Right. Measles in Disneyland. I don't know about this hantavirus, but that's kind of my point. There are viruses everywhere. So like, are we really about to focus in on malaria? Like, I'm not. There are viruses everywhere. And so then I think we're not. So now let me kind of like break into some of these other like little pieces or whatever, because again, like upcharging tourism, that's not it is a scam, but it ain't a scam, right? I mean, everywhere you go, if you're going to a place where there's tourism and a big tourist market, or you're going to an area where there's tourism, there's going to be an upcharge. If you want to go into Seoul, Tokyo, Dubai, Limon. You can start naming places in certain countries that have a high attraction for tourism, and the prices are just going to be higher there, period. If you want to go into a place where you're really experiencing the culture, you're going to have to travel outside of some of those main countries, and that's going to be anywhere you go. So once again, if you go into Accra, should that be any different than if you went to Tokyo? Okay. Oh, and then this is the last thing, and then I'm gonna just kind of talk a little bit about these opportunities, and then I'm gonna be done for tonight. But the other thing that he mentioned was Laos versus Ghana, right? So basically, he was just talking about how there's a place over in Alabama, I think. I just wrote down the city, Laos, but I believe he was saying it was over in Alabama. And basically, he was just like, this is a place that is, very close to undeveloped and third world or whatever over here in America. Okay, that's cool. I've got no issue with that. However, I think there's a big difference between two, let's just say, for all intents and purposes, that we're going to call Ghana a full third world country because it is an emerging country. I don't think it's considered a third world. I don't know because I didn't look that up for sure. But let's just put them on the same playing field, right? So you're going to say we have Laos, Alabama, and we have Ghana. And what he asserted was that we should be putting our energy into Laos, Alabama. Now, here's the difference. In Laos, Alabama, I would almost be willing to guarantee that if not in Laos, but all surrounding Laos is the KKK, and all of them, all the white folks who are out here doing all the most. You are running into a system of racism where over in Ghana, they're inviting you to come in. Now, I'm not saying every Ghanaian is going to be happy that you're there, but the country is inviting you to come in. And so when we talk about where we want to go, if we want to invest in development, I'm not that excited about investing in Laos. I'm not saying that we shouldn't because our own people here live there, but I'm saying that we have different options and different choices. And oftentimes we get into an or when it should be an and. If there's opportunity over in Laos, Alabama, we should, as a community, as a country, invest in that. Although I also believe it's the government's job to invest into that space. But let's just say we're going to go over and invest in that space. Why does that need to be an or Ghana instead of an and Ghana? We can't invest into both places that we want to have or want to be a part of or whatever. So I just feel like that or mentality is a really detrimental mentality to the Black community in a lot of cases. I'm not going to say in every case, because yes, we can care about a lot of things, and some of those things we got to pull back on. We do only have but so much. So I'm not going to say that we can just and everything, but we don't always have to make some of the choices that are being pushed out there. Like we have to make these choices. So anyway, that's basically it's about a 30-minute video. And that's basically his video that I just feel like was such a reach and was just a grossly misrepresented version of like what's going on over there, how things really are, the cause of certain things, the impact that is being had, or whatever the case might be. And I'll agree with the idea that a lot of the numbers that have been put out there have definitely been inflated. But I don't see how that necessarily ties back into ADOS. And I also don't see this as being like something where the Ghanaian, the country of Ghana is trying to like scam ADOS. I do believe that they have their own agenda, and their agenda is to help continue to build up a country that is emerging, and they want to stabilize their economy. And they do believe, and I've spoken to many Ghanaians who do believe that we need to have a Ghanaian and American alliance in order to help build and stabilize that country. However, the other piece of that is, and this is where some of the opportunity lies, this is a global economy. And the idea that we would only and solely focus in from an investment and a business and an infrastructure standpoint in what's happening here in America is crazy. I would never recommend that. There are countries and people from all over the world that are traveling to various countries in Africa because so many of these countries are beginning to emerge and their economies are beginning to stabilize. And so they're getting in at the ground level. When you come in when it's already stable, now you're in a whole different situation. Try going to Silicon Valley today and starting a tech company. Like that don't work. It's already saturated. It's already built. Now, if you were one of the first people to get into Silicon Valley, like you was doing something. Think about Detroit. There's still a ton of opportunity in Detroit. Shout out to the People's Action. I don't know if y'all can see my shirt. Shout out to the People's Action out there, and New Era Detroit, matter of fact. and Force Detroit. There's a bunch of folks out there in Detroit doing some good stuff. But, you know, if you were to have gotten into Detroit 10 years ago, you would already be seeing a whole different level of profit than if you go into Detroit today, because the prices are already back rising. There are already houses in Detroit that are worth $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. But 10 years ago, they weren't at that space. Right? So the idea that you have an opportunity to take your dollars and stretch them, we're not even talking about the opportunity in the currency exchange. We're not even talking about the opportunity in the currency exchange, how much further your dollar can go. So think about this. So think about if you live in a place right now that has a high cost of living, and you are able to take your same income and move it to a place that has a lower cost of living, how much further your dollar stretches. Think about if you, first of all, in Denver, Colorado, in metropolitan Denver, Colorado, you ain't even really going to find a house anymore for $200,000 or $250,000. I want to say the average cost is like $350,000 and up on average. So let's just say you take your $350. What would $350 for a house buy you here in Colorado? Maybe a 3-bedroom. Maybe a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, something like that. A really small house is what you're going to get for $350,000 out here. Now, my question is, what happens if you take your $350,000 and you go to Laos, Alabama? Okay, don't go there. But I'm just saying, what would happen if you take your same $350,000 and you buy a house in Detroit? You can get damn near a mansion for $350,000 in Detroit. You can get a 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 square foot house, where that same $350,000 is going to get you a 1,500 square foot house here in Metro Denver, Colorado. So now, how are we not talking about the opportunity that exists? If you have saved up some money here and you're thinking about a place to invest, do you have to invest here in order for you to profit here? Do you have, so their idea of being of abodement is like perfect if you want to make an investment and then still live here, where this is a global economy. It's never going to go back from being a global economy. Matter of fact, it's been a global economy. If you think about the whole idea of a slave trade was a global economy, right? But now it's a global economy at the click of a button instead of a global economy at the expense of a 3-month or 4-month, boat ride to get somewhere. But this is a global economy. It's been a global economy for a very, very long time, for thousands of years. People have been trading across countries. They travel to do trade and all of this. So why is it that if we don't have a lot, are we expected to take our few pennies and invest it in a place that is that costs the most to build anything? When we have opportunities to go to places that are welcoming our investment, you can get in at the ground floor and you can help build the infrastructure and stability. If you want to come and build something right now, again, in Denver, Colorado, you're going to invest millions upon millions of dollars to build up something where you can now go in and invest in Ghana's infrastructure for thousands, millions here. Because people have already invested, the infrastructure's already been built, the permits have already been done, right? And so the whole idea that we would not take advantage of emerging countries that are calling to us and not saying that you have to become a citizen in order to build here, but actually saying you can just come here. We're going to make it easy for you to come here. That's literally like the whole premise of big business trying to be over here. So he did make a correct assertion when he said that Africa wants to participate in capitalism, but Africa has been capitalized on for hundreds of years. At what point is Africa and all its varieties and all its various countries supposed to actually participate in the system that has been holding it down for all this time? Or are they just supposed to sit back? Think about it like this. The whole idea of reparations and ADOS is that we can participate from a place of leverage and equity inside of this system. And if you think that that's not the case, go to ADOS101.com and look at what the Black agenda is. It's how we participate in the system that's already here. It's not about tearing down the system. It's about maybe dismantling certain pieces of it, like dismantling some of the criminal justice and all of that. But the reality of the majority of this is how we from over here come in and from a place of leverage and from a place of equity, be able to actually participate in the system. So now you mean to tell me that African countries are wrong for wanting to participate in the system that's been oppressing them for as long as it's been oppressing us? We're all affected by violent white racists. That's why I said we have to understand, once again, what ADOS is supposed to stand for, based out of Antonio Moore's own words. ADOS is a designation to define who is entitled to a reparations claim against the United States. This is not a black folks versus black folks. This is not American black people versus African black people. It's not that. It should not be that. Ever. If there's not an African country that is saying that black Americans don't deserve reparations, have you heard of that country? I haven't heard of that country. If you have, please drop it in. Please drop in which African country is saying that black Americans are not supposed to get reparations. I know of no African country that is fighting against reparations for black Americans. So why are we fighting against African countries? I don't understand. I'm aware that Africa is a continent. I don't know why you said that, but all right. So there is opportunity that's out there. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that the idea of either a dual citizenship. So then once again, Ghana is not requesting that you give up your citizenship. They're saying if you want to have citizenship in Africa, or in Ghana rather, then you can get your citizenship in addition to keeping your American citizenship. Now, that could be very interesting as Africa is creating kind of this passport system similar to the European nations, so that if you are a citizen of an African country, that you can travel to all the other African countries on like this universal passport. So having a dual citizenship could provide you with a lot of access to a lot of emerging countries, or countries that are proving to be fairly stable. So you're kind of late to the show, Glamour Diva. So we're going to let you just catch up on that, boo. So there's a lot of opportunities inside that dual citizenship. And then if you don't want to do a dual citizenship, you can still go over there and you can still create and build business. You can buy land. You can begin to create some other things, which can still all be a part of your passed down of wealth, your generational wealth. The idea that you should only have like your generational wealth built on American soil and invested inside of, the American economy, to me, is just not a solid idea. America is also a very young country, and America's been around for basically 400 years ish. And actually, I take that back. That's not accurate. But we've been on this land for about 400 years, and the concept of America and the purpose of why they came over here is roughly around 400 years-ish. Now, there are countries and empires that lasted 800 years, 1,000 years before their empires fell, right? So the idea that like America is going to always maintain this strong foothold and that you should never venture out and build wealth in other places, that doesn't stop you from building wealth here, and also doesn't stop your wealth here. If I build a business over in any other country and I'm still living here and I'm still tied to here, then that still is a positively affects my children and my children's children and my children's children's children. So I think that if you are a Black American, you are interested in building businesses, you are interested in investing, I think it's absolutely an amazing idea to consider elsewhere. I'm not saying you have to go there, but if it calls your name, why not? You getting into the construction business here in a place that's already built versus getting into a construction business in a place that's building. I mean, the business is there. They're building. They're going to be looking for you. They're going to be looking for infrastructure to be built. There are ways that we can take our knowledge and our information and take it over there and make millions of dollars. Your dollar is going to stretch in a different way over there while they're a country that's emerging and stabilizing. And it's not just Ghana. Obviously, I'm just using that because this is the conversation, but it could be like that in a variety of different places. If you want to take your dollars and move over to Thailand, or the Philippines, your dollar is going to stretch. If you want to take your money and move over to, somewhere in South America, in most of the South American countries, your dollar is going to stretch. The difference is what policies are put in place in order to allow that to happen. So I'll give you an example. In Costa Rica, you cannot come over there as a non-citizen and get a job. Now you can come over and start a business, but you can't come over in there and get a job. So if you wanted to leave and go to Costa Rica, you better have a business plan in order to make that situation, actually work for you, because you're not going to be able to go over there and get a job and work. So unless you got some other way that you're going to make money, that's not going to happen. And when you have places like that are offering the level of abodement that Ghana is offering as an example, then that means you can go over there, and whether you have a business plan or not, you can get help from some of the families. They can hire you, they can pay you, and things like that. So you can begin to build in other ways. So I'm going to wrap all this up because I'm on for a lot longer than I normally am. But all I'm going to say is that this is a global economy and we need to be participating at every level. And I talked about this just briefly on Tuesday when I talked about the different ways that things works. You got people who need to be in the system, who can be a virus to the system. You got to have people who are attacking the system, and you got to have people who are replacing things. And we have to build as we change and break down the system. We still have to build. We can't say I don't have, so I can't do. I would never ever subscribe to that thought process. I don't have, so I can't do. Our ancestors, if they did nothing else, they learned how to do with the least of what they had, and they still learned how and figured out how to do. So we have to learn to work together in what we need to do and stop constantly trying to attack and tear down each other. Everyone else is participating in global trade. You want to know one of the businesses that we are least involved in is exports. Exporting, importing, we're not involved in that. But what's interesting to me about this idea around how we can go to other places and have an opportunity to really build big businesses, it's interesting because one of the bullets in ADOS's Black agenda is for an increase in SBA lending to Black-owned businesses. So, why are we attacking businesses? If we want to have SBA lend us businesses, we need to be building them. We can't wait just to mandate SBA to lend to businesses that aren't stable, have no history, haven't been growing, haven't been scaling. The current issue is that government-backed loans don't come to Black people. And so we're constantly undercapitalized, which is why we struggle to build. So how is it that we are now attacking the whole idea? I don't even understand the Boyce Watkins and the Antonio Moore attack on each other. It just makes no sense to me. If Boyce Watkins is talking about how to build business in Black America, let him talk about how to build business in Black America. Business ownership across the board is absolutely integral to having and building generational wealth. If Antonio Moore is talking about policy, let him talk about policy. They fucking go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. Okay, I'm done. All right, that's it, y'all, for me for tonight, because now I done got my whole, I don't even get why we are attacking each other. They go hand in hand. These two fellas should not be attacking each other constantly. It just doesn't make sense. Antonio Moore should be focused on the policies that we need in order for us to make way for solid businesses to be built. And that means that somebody needs to be helping to build the damn businesses. Why, guys? Why do we do it to each other? So, with that said, I'm going to sign off. Y'all share this information out, because I do want people to go and listen to what he said, but I just want you to listen to it with a different perspective, because a lot of what he said was just so far reaching. And again, I just want to assert really strongly how much I respect the movement and what he's doing. And at times, and this was something that was said on Roland Martin's show, and not by Roland Martin, but just by one of his commentators, he was like, the woman who said it, she was like, we have so many people who just get paid, to come on and to create all this dysfunction and to create all this whatever, right? And so it's just so, it hurts my heart, because this was such a far-reaching assertion, the way that he is trying to, discourage people from looking at Ghana, which really just literally affects ADOS in no way, shape, or form. Like he couldn't make any strong tie to how this weakens the movement for ADOS, other than the idea about where Black people should be spending their money. And that's just a slippery slope to get into, about telling folks where we should. There's a whole lot of shoulds that we could get into before investing or visiting Africa is one of them. Any parts of Africa is one of them. We should be not necessarily investing in all of our hair weave. We should not be investing in shoes. We should not be investing in cable TV. We should not be investing in a whole lot of stuff before we should not be investing in traveling experiences and experiencing other places, other cultures, and in particular, ones of where our lineage actually originally descends from. So I just hope that we get it, and that we begin to see that there are global opportunities that we absolutely should be taking advantage of. Absolutely should be taking advantage of. And to know that there are people on both sides of that. I know many people in Ghana who are really working on building bridges for import exports. So, if you're not in import export now, it doesn't matter, because the reality of it is that in Black businesses, we are in the lowest barrier to entry industries by far. And this is one of the reasons why we struggle to have thriving, successful, scalable businesses, because we just do stuff that's really easy to get into. We don't get into the tough stuff. Getting into a solid or a strong import-export business in a place who has a really strong currency exchange going on, what? Okay. All right, I digress. I will see y'all on Tuesday. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share. I thank y'all for joining me tonight. And don't forget that the podcast is launched. So if you haven't checked out the first episode, which came out last night, go back and check that out. That podcast is going to be out every Wednesday. And so that's the Boss Up with BBI podcast, where we're talking about all things money and mindset in the Black community. All right, y'all. Peace.